intersexual selection, which is intermean between the sexes. So it's basically preferential mate choice. And there, the issue is, what are the qualities that men and women, or males and females, desire in the opposite sex? And the logic there is that you need some variability in those qualities, and so they could be anything. They could be physical appearance, they could be sense of humor, they could be intelligence, they could be personality characteristics. So first, there has to be variability. Second, there has to be some heritability to the variability. And then third, there has to be some consensus. It doesn't have to be total, but some agreement on what qualities are desired. And so, for example, just hypothetically, if it were the case that all women preferred to mate with men who had red hair, okay, it actually doesn't occur. Redhead is not typically a dominant preference, but if they did, then over time you would see an increase in the frequency of redheadedness in the population, because those with red hair would have a mating advantage. They would be selectively chosen. Those lacking red hair would be, kind of banished or do less well on the mating market. And so again, you can see evolution, which simply means change over time, either due to qualities that lead to same success in same-sex battles, or due to possessing qualities that are valued by the opposite sex.
Okay, so let's talk about peacocks then.
Yeah.
What could possibly have caused a peacock to develop that insane plumage, and how would that be preferential, and why would that be preferential to the opposite sex?
Yeah, it's a great question, Joe. It basically, we know that it is preferred by the opposite sex. So the more brilliant the plumage, the more luminescent the plumage, the more females like it. And there are a couple different hypotheses that have been put forward to explain it. We don't know totally the answer to it, but one is that it has to do with parasite load. So parasites decrease the luminescence of the plumage. So a peacock that had a high parasite load would be less healthy. And so one hypothesis is that females are cueing into a health cue. Another hypothesis was put forward by an Israeli biologist named Zahavi, called the handicap hypothesis. And the idea there is that the peacocks are saying, I am so big and strong and fit that I can carry around this massive structure and still survive and still thrive. And so I must have pretty good genes. So we don't know, but it could of course be some combination of those or a third factor, but we do know females prefer it, and probably linked to a health cue, possibly linked to a handicap.
Well, it's interesting because it exists in turkeys as well. Like, turkeys have that big plumage that they puff out when they're trying to attract the ladies.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
Yeah, I have. Many species do. You see and you raise an interesting issue that having to do with the sex difference in this. So why does it seem to be the males who are always doing this and not the females? Which is interesting, because in our species, if you ask which sex devotes the most attention to changing their physical appearance, it's actually females. So women, for example, spend 9 times more money on cosmetic enhancements, makeup and so forth, compared to men. It was the sex difference in who does the choosing, who does the competing, was so pronounced that Darwin even called the preferential mate choice component female choice, simply because he observed that it seemed to be the females who were more choosy about who they mated with, and the males were more indiscriminate. They would basically mate with almost any female who would have them. But what's interesting is when we get to humans, we find that both components of sexual selection apply to both sexes. So that is, in our species, both males compete with other males for access to females, and females compete with other females for access to desirable males, and both men and women have preferential mate choice. And I know this for a fact, not just from the empirical studies, but in my undergraduate courses. I have a couple hundred students, and I ask them, how many males, how many of you guys have no preferences and would just mate with any female no matter what? And typically there's like one smart-ass guy at the back of the room who raises his hand, but men have strong preferences. Now, they differ in some ways from the preferences of women, and there is the very important issue of whether you're going for a short-term mate, a one-night stand, a casual sex partner, or a hookup, as they call it on college campuses, or you're going for a long-term, committed, pair-bonded partner, because the qualities that people prefer differ dramatically. So, bottom line here is both components of sexual selection operate within both sexes.